This is where I keep my collection of dead fish. It also holds 10 gallons of water and a growing population of planaria, ram's horn snails, bladder snails, and Malaysian trumpet snails, all of which will soon be feasting on the body of a dead tiger barb. The scent of the dead fish is spreading throughout the tank, and the ram's horn snails are the first to find the body. Hungry planaria are now on the move as well because they can sense that there's food in the water. As these planaria search for the body of the dead fish, let's take some time to learn a little bit more about these amazing animals. Planaria are the simplest living animals that have a head and that are also bilaterally symmetrical, which means that both the left and right halves of the body are mirror images of each other. They belong to a group of animals known as the flatworms due to their very flattened body design. In fact, the body of a planaria is so thin that the majority of their cells are located right next to the surface, so the cells can take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide directly through the skin. As a result, planaria have no need for a respiratory system. They also don't have a circulatory system, and their digestive system is very simple, with a single opening for food to go in and waste products to go out. Furthermore, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of species of planaria, but no one knows for sure how many there really are. They live mostly in fresh water, but there are some planarians that live in salt water, as well as some species that live on land. The typical freshwater planaria found in our aquariums can reach a length of just under half an inch, or a little over 12 millimeters, but exact measurements are difficult because planaria can change their size by contracting or expanding their bodies. And most fish keepers don't even realize that there are planaria in their aquarium until they see one crawling on the glass at the front of the tank. And then they might recognize the telltale triangular-shaped head of a planaria. This distinctive triangular shape is caused by these two organs right here, which are known as auricles. The auricles on a planaria contain chemoreceptors that they use to help them find their food. They also contain special mechanoreceptors that are sensitive to touch and water pressure, so a planaria can sense changes in water currents. The triangular-shaped head of the planaria makes it easy to distinguish it from some of the other worm-like creatures that appear in our aquariums. But it's important to note that not all planaria have these large auricles, so not all planaria will have a triangular-shaped head. A much more reliable indicator that the worm in question is in fact a planaria are these two eye spots located right next to the auricles. These two primitive eyes are positioned on top of the head, and they aren't sophisticated enough to provide a detailed view of the world, so they're only able to sense the differences in light and dark areas of their environment. The planaria do not like bright light, so they stay hidden most of the time. But when they do come out and move around, they use tiny hair-like structures known as cilia on the underside of the body to carry them along. This form of locomotion is known as ciliary gliding, and it's the same method that ram's horn snails and bladder snails use to move around as well. And in order to make it easier for the planaria as well as the snails to slide along the substrate, they all secrete a thin layer of mucus along the way to help them glide across any surface with little to no resistance. And this seemingly effortless gliding over the substrate is only made possible by lots of tiny hairs all moving together along a thin coating of mucus. But that's not all. The planaria can also produce a string of mucus that's strong enough to hold up its own weight, which allows it to hang off of objects in the aquarium in much the same way that a spider can hang by a thin strand of silk. Here's one hanging from a piece of chicken liver by a tiny thread of mucus. And here's another one suspended in mid-water. Notice how the planaria wraps itself around the mucus thread and can even climb up the string of mucus just like a spider can climb up a tiny strand of its own silk. It looks as if it's just floating in mid-water, but it's actually hanging from a very thin strand of mucus. Planaria also have several adhesive glands along the underside of the body that can secrete a glue-like substance that enables them to firmly attach themselves to any hard surface. Here we can see one trying to reach out and grab a piece of chicken liver while the adhesive glands on the tail keep it firmly attached to the branch. The planaria can sense the food is really close by, but it can't actually see it. Nonetheless, it gets ready to feed by extending a special tube-like organ called a pharynx that it normally keeps hidden inside the body. And if you watch closely, you'll be able to see it sticking out when I restart the video. Let's look at that again, but this time I'll zoom in a little so you'll be able to get a closer look. Planarians are the only creatures that I'm aware of that have a head and a mouth that are in completely different places on the body. Now let's look at this strange feeding tube from a slightly different angle. In this view of the planaria, we can see where the opening for the mouth is, and we can see the muscular tube known as the pharynx that the planaria uses to feed. All of these colored areas are the digestive system. Notice how it takes up most of the planaria's body. Then notice how the planaria's feeding tube is in the middle of the digestive system. This arrangement is not by accident because delivering the food to the center of the digestive system is the most efficient way to distribute it across such an expansive area. And this is the reason why the planaria has a mouth in the center of its body rather than on its head. It's really just a matter of digestive efficiency. And now that we know a bit more about how the planaria is put together, we'll return to our dearly departed friend, the dead tiger barb, so that you can see the feeding tube in action. And if you recall, when we last saw this fish, the snails had just started to find the body. But I know from experience that within about 10 minutes, this dead tiger barb will be completely covered in snails and planaria. The planaria are slow-moving carnivores. They don't jump on their prey, they crawl on it carefully and slowly. They feed on the weak, the slow, the sick, the dead, and the dying. However, different species prefer different prey, and some are more aggressive than others. Nonetheless, planaria don't have any jaws and they don't have any teeth. They feed by extending a muscular tube-like organ known as the pharynx that protrudes from the underside of the body. The pharynx is then pressed against the prey while it releases digestive enzymes that break down the prey's tissues into smaller pieces so that they can be ingested using the straw-like pharynx. Now I've paused the video here so that I can tell you what you're about to see next. This planaria is about to extend its pharynx, and it does this by contorting its body and sending a wave of muscular contractions from the head down to the tail. The dark area right here is where the skin has been pinched together as the planaria squeezes the muscles around the pharynx so that it can be pushed out of the body. It's a slow process, but the planaria is in no hurry, and this tiger barb isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Watch this area right here and you'll be able to see the planaria's pharynx as it extends from the body and then searches for a soft spot where it can penetrate the fish's skin. The pharynx is now pressed against the fish while it injects digestive enzymes that break down the fish's tissue into small pieces that the planaria can then eat. If a planaria is unable to find food for an extended period of time, it will first begin to use up the stored fat in its body. Then, when all the stored fat is consumed, it will start to digest its own tissues, beginning with its reproductive organs first. And once that's all used up, they'll start consuming the other parts of themselves. In fact, during an extended period of starvation, a planaria will essentially eat itself until it's been reduced to just a tiny collection of cells. And if a situation should arise where there's only one planaria, they have the amazing ability to literally tear themselves in half in order to reproduce. To put it simply, they stretch themselves out until they're really thin. Then they use their muscles to pinch off a section in the middle of the body until they break in half, with one half containing the head and the other half containing the tail. The tail section will grow a new head and two eyes, and the head portion will grow a new tail, and now instead of one planaria, you have two. This is a form of reproduction called binary fission, and it's usually reserved for much smaller creatures such as bacteria, paramecia, and amoebas. Planaria also lay two types of eggs. They have summer eggs that normally take 2 to 3 weeks to hatch, and they also lay winter eggs that have a thick protective coating that keeps the eggs from drying out. It also makes them very resistant to heat, cold, and chemical treatments. Some of these winter eggs can even lay dormant for years if conditions are not favorable. And since planaria are nearly indestructible, they're everywhere, so it's very easy for them to get into your freshwater aquarium, and it's very likely that you have at least one or two of these amazing little creatures living in your tank. They can be introduced to your aquarium on live plants or by hitching a ride on snails. They can even be in the water that came from the pet store with your new fish. Their durable egg capsules might also be attached to rocks, driftwood, filter media, substrate, nets, hoses, or aquarium decorations, all of which can transfer the planaria from one aquarium to the next. Now, if you end up with a lot of planaria in your tank, it probably means that you're overfeeding. Remember, planaria are carnivores, so they're after protein-rich foods, and just like snails, if you give them a lot of food, they'll make a lot of babies. Yes, underneath that pile of snails is the dead tiger barb, and this was only 10 minutes after putting it in my little fish graveyard. So you've determined that you have planaria in your fish tank, and now you're wondering if it's something that you should be worried about. Well, in my experience, planaria don't cause a problem for healthy fish, their eggs, or their babies. However, fish that are weak, dead, or dying will probably become a target for the hungry planaria, who are more like vultures that clean up the dead rather than birds of prey who hunt. And they find their food by using their incredible sense of smell. Remember, planaria have very simple eyes that can only see if it's light or dark, so they don't use their eyes to find their food. Hungry planaria will go after shrimp, who make an easy target because they live on the bottom and they don't move around a whole lot, so the planaria have easy access to shrimp. But they can't feed through the hardened exoskeleton of the shrimp, so they have to position themselves in such a way that they can extend the pharynx underneath the shrimp so that they can feed on the softer parts beneath the shell. But given the choice, they seem to prefer eating the fish pellets rather than trying to sneak onto the body of a healthy shrimp. Unfortunately, female shrimp who are carrying eggs seem to be an especially tempting target for the hungry planaria. The numerous eggs on a buried female shrimp make it much easier for the planaria to sneak onto the shrimp undetected, and it's also very possible that shrimp eggs are delicious. So it's usually the female shrimp carrying eggs that are attacked by the hungry planaria, and when it's all said and done, where shrimp are concerned, it's best to be cautious. This is a female cherry shrimp, and she's carrying eggs. In just a moment, a planaria is going to sneak under her tail and then begin to eat the eggs. And here it comes right now. The planaria is very slow and gentle as it crawls on to one of her eggs, and the mother shrimp has no idea that it's there. Now, I don't see how a single planaria could eat more than 1 or 2 eggs at the most, but if more than one of them is attacking this shrimp, then these eggs could be gone in no time. So, you've decided that one planaria is too many, and you'd like to do something about it. Well, the standard solution for removing planaria is usually a chemical treatment. However, I don't recommend adding poisons to your aquarium, but if you'd like to know more about those chemical treatments, there are lots of videos out there that talk about how to use them. But I should warn you, those poisons wipe out a lot more than just planaria, and if you kill a bunch of different animals in your aquarium, your ammonia levels will increase, which may harm your shrimp. One chemical that's often recommended is fenbendazole, which is extremely toxic to snails and can persist in your aquarium for many months after treatment. It also has no effect on planaria eggs. The other chemical treatment is a product called no planaria that can also be harmful to snails, but some species of snails seem to be more immune to the treatment than others. Nonetheless, chemical treatment should be a last resort. Luckily, there are several other things that you can do to reduce the number of planaria in your aquarium and give you some peace of mind. And if you still decide to use a poison, it's still a good idea to do all of these other things that I'm going to recommend first, because they all help increase the effectiveness of the chemical treatment. The first thing that you should do is reduce the amount of food going into the tank. However, if this is the only thing that you do, the planaria will get very hungry, which might cause them to start looking at the shrimp as a source of food. So you'll want to reduce the food supply, but at the same time you'll also want to remove as many planaria as you can by purchasing specially made Planaria Traps. You could also make a trap of your own using a bottle, so search for videos on how to do that. It's also helpful to stop feeding altogether for a few days while you're using the planaria traps, because they're more likely to enter the trap if the only food in the tank is inside the trap. Unfortunately, planaria are very difficult to get rid of completely using only traps, but you can get the population down to a small enough size where they no longer pose a problem. Then the key to long-term control is to limit their supply of food. And remember, they're carnivores, so limiting their access to protein will work wonders. I would also continue to use the traps as often as possible. Fish can also help keep the numbers under control, but they probably won't wipe them out altogether. And any fish that breaks a planaria into several pieces just makes the problem worse, because each little piece will become a whole new planaria. In a shrimp-only tank, you can eliminate the planaria's food supply completely by only feeding the shrimp leaves. Then the only protein in the tank would be the shrimp themselves, but that's where the planaria traps come into play. Because it might just be that the planaria don't bother the shrimp until they get really hungry. So when you cut off their food supply, it would be a good idea to remove as many planaria as you can using the traps. Planaria are just like snails in many different ways. They both use ciliary gliding and mucus to get around, and they both produce a lot of babies if you give them a constant supply of food. And they're both often viewed as pests. However, in a balanced ecosystem where we're not dumping tons of food into the aquarium, the snails, the shrimp, and the planaria can all live together in the same space without much trouble. And it's only when we upset the balance by adding too much food that some creatures take advantage of the abundance by producing a lot of young. Those offspring will then need to eat as well, and that's when things go wrong for the shrimp, because in a battle for survival, the planaria will always win. Because these odd little flatworms are practically indestructible, and even if you do manage to eliminate them with a poison for a while, I can almost guarantee that they'll be back. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I really hope that you have a beautiful day.